All right, well, welcome everybody back to another episode of Night School. We're back. Obviously, still doing our remote thing, but we're trying to make the best of it that we can. And I'm joined here by Mr. Bob himself.
I'm ready.
Indeed, I hope you are. So we did 2 episodes of this. We took a little hiatus. We were trying to get some other things get going on our Discord, on our Patreon. Some of our live streams, of course, have been really taking off. So we've been fairly busy with some of that, but we want to get back to basics. We want to get back to the good stuff. So, Bob, this is our 3rd episode, and today we're going to talk about dungeons as a flowchart. So we're going to talk about dungeon design a little bit. All right.
Okay.
So what we really want to think about here, and I think there's sort of a 3-way approach. And while I kind of think about this, why don't you remind everybody kind of where we're standing currently?
Okay. Well, I am about a year into GMing, and I've only ran like 1 or 2 games, some of them on the Discord that we have going in the Patreon. They've let me run some, but I'm running pre-written adventures and one-shots that's sort of already there. And I've never really developed my own, but it sounds so cool. The sandbox idea where you can create your own world or your own, own world. But Derek wants me to do baby steps as we go through the school here and learn this. But in the previous episodes, we kind of learned about like what is a dungeon, why do a dungeon, and then we settled on a bottom-up approach for my sort of dwarven stronghold. Right.
So right now, we're working with this idea of this dwarven stronghold, right?
Oh yeah.
And what are some of the characteristics that we sort of decided upon on that,
Okay. Well, so at one point it was this very strong, outpost, maybe there's a lot of trade going on.
Right.
And there might have been a betrayal at some point. Somehow it got overran by something evil.
Right.
Now it is abandoned by the dwarves at least. And people are going to go in and try to figure out what's going on. And our thought was maybe there is a undead dwarf presence.
Okay.
It's somewhere in the dungeon. But the idea being that why are they undead? And is there something greater evil sort of beneath? And we had sort of come out with the idea that maybe this is on a ley line and there's some kind of necromancer there. And the reason that some of these dwarfs did not move on is because of this evil presence, this ley line that was there, their selfishness, their greediness.
Right.
But yeah, undead was one of the tropes of this big, strong dwarven stronghold. Obviously traps or something like that is all going to be in this dungeon as well.
All right. Now, one of the other things that we talked about doing was diversifying sort of the threats.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the other thing that we talked about adding to this dungeon was some sort of third party.
Yes, there's three factions.
Okay. Yeah. What do we got?
Well, that one kind of jumped around a bit. We had obviously the heroes coming in.
Right.
We have the undead dwarfs and maybe necromancer below. But then we had talked about maybe there is either orcs coming in because they want this. We had sort of played with the idea that maybe there's a dragon that's coming in as part of this orc evil mob or goblin mob.
Right.
Maybe they got like a youngling, coming in to sort of claim this area as well, the gold or something.
But I thought we had discussed that there was actually sort of the undead dwarves were sort of a natural occurrence. And the necromancer was sort of his own thing.
The necromancer is his own thing.
Okay.
We had talked about why did some of the dwarfs become undead? And it was because of the ley line,
right?
Because there's this evil presence here, and you sort of are going to try to solve that as you figure out why are the dwarfs still alive? Why didn't they move on? Why are they walking around like this?
Yeah, exactly.
Necromancer is the big one kind of below.
Right. So this is kind of what we're working with here.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So Bob has given us an overview of sort of some of the thematic elements of his dungeon. And so today I wanted to kind of walk him through at least what I do. And to be fair, there's really 3 ways you could do this, Bob.
Okay.
So one thing like you could do is, you could start with sort of the monster stats, right? You could start designing encounters.
Sounds awesome.
Okay. And To be clear, that is a very valuable, valid way of designing it, right? Where so the first thing that you could do, in fact, we'll probably do a video on each of these, and you could kind of watch them and sort of do them in whichever order you want. Or sometimes I'll even go back and forth between these three things.
Okay.
So one is sort of the monster or the encounter. The second way that you could design these is sort of the dungeon. What I will call, I'll call them the dungeon signature rooms.
Okay, so focal points.
Yeah, we'll call them. I like your term better, Bob. We'll call them.
Okay. Sweet.
We'll call them dungeon. Because again, I mean, this isn't some. This is just the way I do it. So, dungeon focal points. These are key important rooms that that you want to have part of your dungeon. Maybe a big set piece or a really cool idea that you had about a room. You just want that to be in your dungeon. You can start designing those rooms and sort of some of the elements that go into it. And then the third way, which is the way that we're going to do it today, is the sort of dungeon flow chart. And the idea behind this is, and this is the key secret, is that your dungeon is actually, it's a board game.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And the key thing is to start thinking about your dungeon as if it was a board game.
Okay.
And not thinking of it as a real place. Now, I understand that there's a lot of literature out there that will say that dungeons should be designed to be as realistic as possible, and that'll make the dungeon more realistic.
3-foot hallways.
I disagree with this utterly and completely in its entire premise. Now, I don't think that you should make things zany or wacky, but I think the number one thing that you should focus on is making sure your dungeons are fun and enjoyable and memorable and facilitate interesting and exciting play. And using this process is definitely sort of the key to that. So this gets into this concept where we talk about linear dungeons versus railroaded dungeons. And the way that you make a dungeon interesting as a board game is you think about it as if you were playing some sort of game of Risk or something that has, spaces on the board. All right. Now, when we think of what is the most boring linear board game that you could think of, Bob?
I'm thinking of boring.
Yeah. The answer is Candyland. Okay.
Oh, I like Candyland. You don't have kids. You don't understand.
Okay. So,
Candyland's sweet.
Okay. So Candyland is not even a board game. It's actually not even a game, actually.
It's a random.
No, it's not even random. Because in Candyland, all you are doing is you are just following the paths up the chart.
Yeah. But to move, you have to randomize stuff.
Sure. But the outcome is guaranteed. Right?
You mean that you get to the end.
You're going to get to the end. And the most important thing is you are making no choices, right? Which is why I think it's a horrible game to teach your children, because you're teaching them that life is on a predetermined path, that there is no choices to be made, and you are stuck in the role into which you were given. Okay.
We learn it as the color is purple and count how many squares you need to go.
I'm sure there
more as a math.
Yeah, I'm sure there are additional elements, but this is, believe it or not, now this might look silly as a demonstration, but believe it or not, there are a lot of dungeons out there that follow this exact road. Okay. Oh. Now they don't look like it. Okay. So instead of saying start, instead of saying end, okay, we say, what do we say instead of end?
Boss.
We say the boss. That's right. Exactly, yeah. Bob. We say the boss comes right here. And then instead of the start, we say that this is the entrance. You got it. Okay.
I'm on board.
Now, here is where people get confused. Now, to be fair, if you are a video game designer, okay, or you're designing a board game for children, this is a good process because you are forcing the issue. Right. The players are going to go and they are going. If you put, let's say, a fight in this room, I'm just numbering the fights here. Let's say you put a fight in this room and a fight in this room and a fight in this room and a fight in this room. The heroes are going to fight the fights that you want them to fight. They are going to fight them in the order that you want them to fight them. And eventually, if you design 4 fights, in order to beat the dungeon, they are going to have to fight all 4 of those combats. Okay.
And it shows that they can't fight number 4 early because they won't be strong enough.
Exactly.
Or something.
Well, it's not even strong enough. How can they fight number 4 without going through all the other fights first?
Correct. Absolutely. Okay. So it's very linear.
Very linear. Now, the way that they get around this is they will do things like this. Okay. They will add additional little rooms here and here. Okay. This might even start to say, you're like, oh, I don't know, Derek, this kind of looks like a dungeon.
It does.
Okay. Okay. But it's not, because none of these side branches actually matter. Like, for example, I could put, a side branch over here, and this is fight 2A, right? This is a special bonus fight that you don't
side quest.
It's like a side quest, right? But the fact of the matter is that despite the dungeon looking like this, and having all of these different like places that you could go, you aren't still making any real decisions, because yes, you could go to this room here. Okay. You could go to this room here, but the force, you're forcing the heroes through this. And a great example of this is very famously is like Sunless Citadel, which
this reminds me of like the beginner box.
Yeah, exactly.
It's meant to do a certain way.
You're meant to do it a certain way, and you're giving the players illusory choices. Okay. Most importantly, yes, some players may go to fight 2A and some players may not go to fight 2A. But at the end of the day, rest assured that the heroes are going to, regardless of what path they are going to go through, they are basically going to follow that path, and they're going to make their way through to that dungeon. So this is crap. Okay. So what can we do to make this a little bit differently? I can clear the canvas. Actually, here we go.
How did you draw that sweet box that never moves?
Well, I have the auto shape on, so if I draw it right, it auto shapes it. So let's contrast this. Let's look a little bit differently. Okay. I'm still in my red pen here. Let me switch over to my black pen.
Hate the red pen.
You know this. All right. So let's look at this. Let's look at this design a little bit differently. Okay. So we got our entrance and we go into the dungeon. Okay. Now I'm going to draw real quick. Let's see if I can get it to auto box. There we go.
Ooh.
Okay.
Nice.
All right. Oh, that one didn't go. It's okay.
That's a terrible box. I can already sort of see what you're doing here.
Now, Bob, where's the boss room?
No idea.
Right. You have no idea.
I know where the entrance is.
Right.
It's the only thing I know.
That's right.
And there's some rooms.
And there are some rooms, right? So in this design, the party can kind of make their own route. They can go anywhere. The dungeon isn't forcing them or leading them to go or get anywhere. Now, certainly there are rooms, okay? Like there's this room here in the back, right? I mean, I'm not very proficient with the red pen. So there's this room here in the back. Now, obviously, there are a couple different ways that the party could get to this room, right? The party could go this way, right? The party could go that way. The party could go that way.
Yeah.
Right. The party could go that way. The party,
absolutely.
Right. That there's at least 7 different ways that the party could get to there. And let's just say, for purposes of our example, that this is where the quote unquote big monster is, right? The fact is, you would have designed stuff for these rooms and the party would never have gotten to them, right?
Yeah.
The party will have skipped that content. There is no content in this dungeon which is required. And that means that the players are making actual and real choices. And this philosophy is sometimes called Jacqueing.
Is that French?
It is named after Janelle Jacquet, who she was or she still is, I guess, a cartographer who designed certain maps, including like the maps for caverns of Thracia. And a study of, her mapping techniques really sort of illustrated here this idea that it isn't always the case that just drawing a map is enough. You have to think about your map's design. Okay. The other thing is when we design dungeons like this, okay, as dungeons and flowcharts, we can create what I like to call Nexus Points, right? Critical elements or critical locations within the dungeon that become sort of, it's like unlocking a new area of the dungeon. So let's explain this.
Yeah, I'm a little confused.
Okay. So for example, let's say that again, we got our entrance here. Mm-hmm. Okay. So you come into this room, great. You come over here, you come up here, and you got this basic layout of design here. Okay. Mm-hmm. And then you got this room right here. And this maybe goes over here. Just drawing some stuff here.
Okay.
Okay. Now over here, you have this area over here. Okay. You've got this big old kind of area right here, but you see how this is
one real,
you see how this is almost like its own side dungeon.
And there's really only one way to get there.
And there's only kind of one way to get there, right? You have basically almost created a distinct area within your dungeon. Now, what's cool about this is, naturally that's going to happen, right? What that means though, is that this area, when you're designing a dungeon, becomes a natural sort of focal point for defense, right? Because if, let's say I was a tribe of goblins, okay, and I lived in this area, all I have to defend is right here. Yeah. This is the entry point into this section of the dungeon, right? Yep. Or let's say that this dungeon is populated by a bunch of different creatures, but there's an area of the dungeon that is, overrun by horrific undead. Well, it would make sense that they would probably kill everyone unless they were sort of restricted or, contained within just one area of the dungeon. Let's say this area over here. And what's most important about that is when the players are sort of exploring your dungeon, okay, when they discover, they maybe come up here, they go over here, they say, hey, let's go back over here. When they discover this room, it's like, it's like discovering an opening to a new area. It's like it's rewarding them by now giving them access to these additional areas, right?
Now, how would the player know that?
Well, that's a great question. And part of the way that they would know that is through mapping.
Okay.
The other way that they really can figure that out is through description and flavor text, and how you sort of change and make sure that the players understand that they are moving into sort of a new area of the dungeon.
This one's less dirty and more.
Yeah, it could be a lot of things. Or maybe the smell of rot permeates this area. And one of the things that you can do when you're designing your dungeon is you can put harder monsters, or you could put better treasures in certain areas of the dungeon that you want the players to feel like this was a reward, okay, for discovering. Okay. Certain areas are their own rewards. Like, for example, discovering rooms like these. Okay. Those rooms are important because they, connect to a ton of different rooms.
Yeah.
Right. So in their own way, it's like when you find that room, it's sort of like a nexus, and you're like, wow, discovering this room. What did this room give me from a board game perspective? Right. It gave me a bunch of different options. Okay. For me personally, I think 4 is the most, but, these kind of give you that reward. Something like this, which is sort of a terminal node where it just ends. This is a great place to put things like treasures, right? Mm-hmm. And to put things like non-social monsters. Okay. And the last thing, kind of part and part with treasures, this is a great place to put traps.
Oh, yeah.
Because a trap here is going to kill it. Anybody who's in this dungeon is going to set this thing off over the course of many millennia years. Mm-hmm. Now, I should note, by the way, as we're designing this scales in and out. So what do I mean by that? Well, these don't have to be rooms. Okay.
What do you mean?
What if inside this area, okay, we actually have right, we actually have a bunch of areas and rooms. Okay.
So these boxes aren't rooms, they are areas.
They could be actual areas. Like this could be like, this could be a bunch of hallways and corridors with doors and sections, right? And then each of these boxes has rooms and corridors, okay? And this is actually just representing that this little area here is kind of self-contained. Maybe this is a collection of 5 or 6 rooms, okay? But at the end of the day, there are 2 corridors that leave that kind of area and connect it to other areas. Like maybe this is the goblin controlled area. Okay. And then maybe this is this is sort of a no man's land, right? And then maybe this area up here to the top, this is where the kobolds live. Right. And over here, this is the undead. And this, you know what I mean? Like you can take this design and you can start taking what you have created and you can start adding your dungeon elements into this framework. But the most important part of all of this is you have to give the players choices and rewards. That's the key. All right. Is you got to give them choices and rewards.
Okay.
So
choices and rewards.
Right. So again, going back to our idea of this entrance, I try to, whenever possible, okay, avoid this in my design, right? Where a room, the only thing it does is feeds into another room, right? Because this isn't really giving the players any sort of choice, right? You are basically, like, think about it. We could eliminate this room and the path is the same, right? So this room really isn't serving any purpose in our game board, okay? Other than making it take longer to get to this room, right? A much more interesting approach would be to give yourself some extra options on how to get somewhere.
Yeah. So then it at least is an interesting,
right? Because now you're giving them 2 choices, but the thing is like, now see, even in this example, this is actually a great example. This is actually also kind of a bad example. Why is this a bad example?
Because it looks like it all leads to the same spot.
It all leads to the same spot, right? Like whether I go left or whether I go right, they all just feed into this room, which just feeds into this room, right? Yep. But if I instead do this, right, now we have a very different set of circumstances because now it's like, okay, well, I'm going to come into the room and I could go up to here and I could come over or I could go down or I could go. But what room here is actually kind of flawed?
What room is kind of flawed?
Yeah.
Probably that top left corner one.
This one?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just going up and feeding over, right? So now we'll give you a choice there. All right. Yep. And is there any other flawed rooms?
Let's take a gander.
So actually our entrance is pretty weak, right? Yeah. The entrance just goes into this room. Why isn't this room the entrance, right? Like it could be.
We're just wasting time.
We're just wasting time. So one thing that you can actually do, which is kind of cool, and this is also how you could think about it in terms of rewards, right? We could have the entrance have 2 rooms off of it, right? What if we connect this room to this room, but we make it a secret?
Ooh.
Right? So now if a player can come from the entrance, they go 1 room, 2 room, find the secret, and then they get access to this room as opposed to
much earlier,
as opposed to having to go through the whole dungeon to get to it. And maybe this room, because, you're thinking about it like, okay, your entrance is here. This is pretty hard to, it's hard to get this deep into the dungeon. So
it reminds me of like the Doom approach where like old school Doom, like I got to find the red skull key.
Sure.
Because the red skull key unlocks that. So I'm going to go through the dungeon to find a way to make it faster to go through this place or that.
That's place. Right. That's exactly right. Because, from a lot of people's perspective, this might be the end of the line, right? They don't know about the secret door. So they think this is a terminal node. They think this is a dead end. And so
especially if you trick them with like treasure or something,
okay,
or not treasure, but like a false tomb type thing. I think it's called false tomb.
So you could have the monster or whatever, the people who live here, they could have put a great treasure here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And to guard that great treasure, they put here, right, some sort of, big bad evil monster.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
But this is the key to creating fun and emergent dungeon play. The smart party, okay? The smart party comes in and they go, whoop, and they just take the treasure.
Yep.
And they never fight the monster at all.
Yep, they read the clues and they figured out there was a door there or something.
There could be a million ways that they got to it. Maybe, and this is how you can also reward exploration. Maybe smart players just find this secret door. Okay, they go into this room and they find the secret door and then they go right into into the treasure hold. But maybe you put something, let's say right here, okay, that has a hint or a clue about this secret door. All right. So now the players feel like, wow, I explored. I got rewarded with information, with lore, with data, and I can use that and take that. And now I can come here and find the secret door. And then boom, I get this treasure
and not have to fight the monster.
And not have to fight the big bad monster. Right. And to be clear, I think to me, this is very exciting. This is very fun because,
what this shows me is it's not up to you.
Correct.
It's up to the players. They chose a different route. You
right.
didn't say you have to go this way to fight this monster. I built the monster.
Right. And that is a tough thing, right? Because you want the players, to fight your big monster.
I built that thing.
I built that thing. Now here is where the challenge actually comes in. And when I say challenge, it's because in modern games we have a problem. Okay? And this is something you have to think about for your Pathfinder 2 game as well. What I'm describing is definitely not ideal for your standard adventure path type adventure. And the reason is because you don't know which direction the players are going to go, okay? And you don't have any idea what they may completely skip over something that is very vital to your plot, okay? And a lot of adventure paths rely on you sort of following the cookie crumbs. This approach will not do that for you. Okay, because as we said, if this is the key villain is in this room that the party has to destroy, and they never encounter that villain, well, we have from an adventure pacing perspective, right? We have a problem. But from a fun experience of exploring your dungeon, your party can have a real fun time with this because their choices matter and they're real choices. They're going to encounter different things. They might be rewarded more or less because of the choices that they made. I should also note that we talked about this earlier, but this is one of the advantages of a dungeon. There are, in our little micro example here, there are probably something like 30 or 40 different ways that a party could technically approach this dungeon. Okay. They could go left and then right and then right and then left. They could go left, right. So in this one example of thing, we could run 5 different parties through this little mini dungeon, and you might get 5 different outcomes. Two or 3 of them may have fought the big bad evil monster. 2 of them didn't. Some of them may have explored this bottom room, and some of them may not have, right? So you get all these exploring things, but here's the thing that's cool about it. You're giving these players all these options. So it is sandboxy play. But at the end of the day, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There are only 10 rooms in this dungeon that you only have to decide and design 10 things. The characters can't go, I'm going to go this way, right? They can't do that. That way doesn't exist. That's not something that's there.
Contained choice.
It's contained choice, right? It's just like when you're outside and you're in the wilderness or whatever, like technically the players could go wherever they want. They could go tramping off into the woods. That is a harder thing to do. And so, with Night School, especially with you, Bob, I want you to give your players true freedom, but I also want to respect the fact that, you just coming up with things on the fly is very tough, right? And so what you can do is you can design your prep. The other thing fun, which is really great too, is when you sit down to start designing your dungeon, you can design the whole thing before your players ever show up at your door. But reasonably and respectfully, you might, let's say we added a couple more, branches to this area. Okay. You might say, you know what? I'm not going to design anything up here yet. I have it sketched out, but I
Yeah.
don't have any of the details or the monsters built for this yet, because you know what? I don't think my players are going to get here this week. All right. There's enough, rooms to get through.
Let me read my rules here. Never force yourself to create more than you must.
That's right. The first rule of Dungeon Craft. Never force yourself to create more than you must, right? And you can add to this dungeon later, or if you want to be really, clever or kitschy, you could say that there's a magical door here that, is sealed until the party finds the key.
Yeah.
Well, maybe the key doesn't exist until you've actually created this area, right?
Clever.
And the other thing too is don't be afraid to, sweeten the pot. If you do create some sort of, magical door or magical seal that sort of locks away this part of the dungeon, if your party is adventuring in this dungeon for, let's say, maybe a session or two, they may have come across this door and they sort of explore this area. When they find this sort of, the green key,
yep,
and they unlock this area, make it cool for them. Make it look different. Make it better treasure, cooler treasure. Even if maybe it's not broken, it doesn't have to be like you broke your game. But if the party hasn't found a magical sword yet, and then you put a magical sword here, right? Or some sort of really cool magical item, it's going to feel like a reward. Yeah, we explored the dungeon. We found the key. We opened the lock. We went in here and we did this. We didn't have to do this part of the dungeon. That wasn't a requirement to do it. There is no requirement for this dungeon. It's just there for us to explore, to see what there is to see, to find what we had to find.
Well, and I guess too, if you're thinking about like going back to my Dwarven Stronghold approach, I mean, the party's just going to look in because at this point we didn't really come with a story, but intrigue, adventures.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, they don't have to adventure farther than they don't want to.
That is true. I mean, and so this kind of gets back to some of the challenges that you are going to face, especially since I know that you're planning on using the Pathfinder 2 system, which is, one is the assumption of the game, okay, is originally the idea was that, and then when I say the originally, I mean like back in the 1970s and 1980s, even maybe the 2000s, is that your characters were these adventurers, okay? They sought treasure and excitement and gold and glory, and they wanted now, to be fair, you can
fame and fortune, everything that goes with it.
That's right. Now, to be fair, in D&D, you can have your cake and eat it too, right? A lot of times, the places that have all the treasure and have all the adventure are also the places where the evil necromancer lives, and he's a threat to the village, right? That's the cool part about D&D. But you were a more mercenary aim, okay? And so the simple fact that there was, to the north of town, this 100 years ago, the dwarves, were driven out of their, stronghold, and it has waited there ever since. And, the brave men and women of the village are brave enough when it comes to guarding their flock, but none of us have ever dared venture up into those mountains to see what the dwarves left behind in their hasty departure. Only, brave and heroic adventurers such as yourselves have the might and the mettle to do so. So there is this presumption of, hey, I want to explore. I want to see what's there to be seen. The other thing is your players have to like it, right? Sneak peek, but one of the things about of Dungeon, one of the rules is challenge the players and challenge the character as well. So challenge the player characters, their characters, with strength, dex, int, whiz, charisma, but also challenge Bob and challenge Nick and challenge Tim. Challenge the players at your table. A good dungeon does both, right? Because the monsters in the room and the traps that are going off are going to be things that their characters are going to deal with, right? They're going to be making attack rolls and saving throws. But navigating the dungeon, making choices about left or right, about finding things and doing things, these aren't things that are written on anybody's character sheet. There's no skill for, hey, where do you think, what should we do next, right? And that's where dungeons can be really fun because it puts a lot of power into the hands of your characters. So one of the first things you have to deal with is motivation, right? But that motivation is compounded by one important problem, which is really something to consider here, and that is XP. Now, Bob, we've been talking a lot. Why is this potentially problematic?
Well, I guess you're talking about in terms of the XP of people want to level up.
Correct. I mean, look, right, wrong, or indifferent.
I want to level up.
Yeah, these games have levels. You get new abilities, more hit points, whatever. People want to level up. And I think that is great. I think a good game aligns player character motivations with player motivations. And players want to have fun and they want to level up. So let's get that all in line. All right. So the reason why that is a problem is because in the olden days, we've got our secret treasure here.
That's where you got the XP from.
That's right. In the earlier editions of the game, treasure, not fighting, not doing anything really, treasure, okay, cold hard cash was how you got most of your XP. And so the smart, and in fact, combat was also very, very deadly. And one could argue that you almost wanted to avoid it. And so if you had the smart group that went through the dungeon, discovered the secret door, and looted the big treasure, the net effect for this group would be
job well done.
They got all the treasure, they got all the experience, and they didn't have to face any of the danger. And you're like, well, yeah, but they didn't get to fight the big bad evil monster. Okay, well, that's true, except there was a really good chance the big bad evil monster could have killed them. In fact, anything could have probably killed them. And second, even if they had fought the big bad evil monster, it would have only given them a small amount of XP. So in your traditional D20 based game, and this became a real problem in 2nd edition D&D, it became a real problem in 3rd edition D&D. If you just rely on the monsters as the source of your experience, you are going to be in trouble. In Pathfinder 2, you're going to be in trouble. Okay. So you need to come up with a new way to award experience for Pathfinder 2. And if you're playing 5th edition, the same thing is true.
I think you've done discoveries before.
Well, there's a couple different ways that we could do this.
At least the games I've run with you, I've seen you do discoveries. I mean, I actually don't like the XP system. I like to say, like, you've done so much, you're level 1.
Right. So you're talking
time in, you put time in, you get the level.
So you're talking about a milestone based experience.
Those are the ones I prefer. Okay. But then a lot of sandbox ones are like, yeah, but can't we go over this other dungeon and like beat that up?
Yeah.
And then we'll level up better so that we go to the main storyline. We're stronger. The problem with
milestone based experience is that milestone based experience is great when, okay. And by the way, we're running an adventure path for our AP. They aren't always super linear. Mm-hmm. Okay. You do get to make choices. Okay. There's a difference between a linear adventure and a railroad. Okay. But an adventure is still linear. But here is the key. Okay. Let's say that these circles represent different encounters that the party may adventure. Okay. And these encounters are all level 1. Okay. And here is a bunch of encounters, and these encounters are all level 2. Mm-hmm. And here's a bunch of encounters, and these encounters are all difficulty level 3. Okay. A milestone based game would say there is some sort of, special encounter.
Yeah. An event or something.
An event or something between these. Okay. And it would say, hey, look, maybe the party fights these 2, or maybe they fight all 4, or maybe they only encounter a couple of them. But once they do this, okay, the party was level 1 here. And no matter how many of these things they do, they are going to stay 1. Yep. But the next section is all level 2. They need to be level 2. And so when they come in and they do this, special encounter here, all right, when they come in here and do this special encounter here, that is when they become level 2.
Yeah, I don't like that idea.
And so what that is basically saying is it doesn't matter what you do here.
Yeah.
You have to do this, and then you become level 2.
What's the one you guys do in L5R, Legend of the 5 Rings? It's time-based, right?
Well, Legend of the 5 Rings is even more. Legend of the 5 Rings would say,
is that time-based XP?
A way to think about Legend of the 5 Rings is, we're getting off topic here, but that's fine.
I know. No. On topic,
no, I mean, look, no one watches these anyways. And if you're watching, if you're watching it, this is the type of conversation that you want to have. So, right. So there's like the sort of standard model that we think of today where you get, XP for encounters.
Yep.
Okay. And I'm saying encounters. Like, I understand that doesn't always mean a fight, right? Like
traps.
it could be a trap. It could be a fight. It could be like a social type thing, right? The second is the milestone model. Okay. Yep. And this has become very popular. Okay. And this basically says you level up basically either when the GM feels like it.
Yeah.
Okay. Or when the, sort of the AP demands it.
Yep,
okay.
Hit those milestone events.
So like when the party finishes the investigation or when the party releases the waters from the Storville Dam, they level to 10. And you guys did, right? You guys technically in our Rise of the Rune Lords AP could have gone off into the mountains and fought hundreds of giants and you wouldn't have leveled to 10. Okay.
I don't like that part.
Well, now, but think about it. Reward shapes player behavior.
I know.
Right. And players, there's very few people. If you're playing Pathfinder 2 or your Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition and you're enjoying the game, you probably enjoy leveling up. If you don't enjoy leveling up, you don't care about it, maybe that's not the right game for you. But if the players know, the players inherently want to level up. So if the players go, okay, so it doesn't matter what we do, until we release the waters from the dam, we are not going to level up.
Yep. So do that first.
that shapes the player's behavior, right? So Milestone is a very powerful tool, okay, for manipulating your players. Mm-hmm. But when you are manipulating your players, be aware, you are taking away some of their agency. You're taking away their control. You're telling them, this is what you need to do in order to succeed. Okay, So the third approach, now Bob mentioned L5R, Legend of the Five Rings. Now in Legend of the Five Rings, you get experience points based on how much time the session was, okay? So if you played like a 2-hour session, you might get a couple hundred XP. If you played like a 5 or 6 hour marathon session, you might get, 5, 6, 7, 800 XP. But really, Legend of the Five Rings is the same thing as like 13th Age, or Bob, it's the same thing as the experimental Pathfinder 2 campaign that we are currently playing, that is going to be released eventually to our Patreon.
Content coming.
Yeah, which we are calling the Dark of Winter. And the idea of Dark of Winter is the same thing as the idea from the game 13th Age, which is that you level up each session.
Yep.
You just automatically level up, regardless of what you did. So in Legend of the Five Rings, you could spend the entire session in town, composing poetry and talking about the weather. And if you play for 4 hours, you are going to get, 400 experience points. On the other hand, in Legend of the Five Rings, you could go out and you could, kick ass and take names and, fight back the Onis of the Shadowlands. And if you do it for 4 hours, you're going to get 400 XP.
I kind of like it.
Okay. Now, but again, what is the advantage here?
The advantage there for the player side is I want to level up and I get to level up every session, which means I don't have to play a session for 3 years to discover those levels.
Well, fair enough. But what if in our example here about leveling up every session, what if this just said you level up every third session?
It would take 3 times as long.
Right. It would take 3 times as long, but it's the same principle. But my point is, what is the motivation that is encouraging?
The motivation is just have fun at the table.
That's correct. It's basically saying, I don't care what you do.
Just have fun.
Just do whatever you want. I am going to reward you regardless.
I like it.
Now, but there's a problem with that.
They could just goof off in town for every day and like, why did they level up to level 10?
Right. It takes away some of the
fantasy flavor.
Because leveling up doesn't make any sense anyways.
Fair enough.
You know what it's like? It's like when you work at your job and you bust your ass and you get like a 10% raise. And then you find out that everybody in the company got a 10% raise. Right. It wasn't because you worked hard. It's just because that's what everybody got. And
at the end of the year, we give everyone 10% raise.
Right. and you're like, okay, so if I work really hard, I get a 10% raise. And if I do nothing and I slack off, I get a 10% raise. It takes away a lot of the achievement that can come from leveling up. Leveling up.
The XP model is really like, I earned every XP that I got.
Players feel like they earned it in this sort of standard model. Now, I should note that some people combine these things.
Yeah, I think
right.
That's
right. But there is, we talked about the standard model that you get XP for encounters, right? And milestones, right? But there is sort of a fourth model, okay? Which is you can get XP, okay, for what we're going to call reward events.
Okay.
Okay. Now, believe it or not, this is actually the original model for Dungeons and Dragons, okay? Okay, because a reward event is what is important in my game. Let me decide what is important in my game. And I am going to reward whatever encourages that behavior.
And that can change, right?
It could change, and it could change based on one thing, which is cool, is it might even vary from player to player.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right? One character, imagine this. In our Rise of the Rune Lords adventure game, you and Gwildor, played by Tim, both are dwarves who have the Vengeful Hatred feat. What if you guys gained experience for killing giants and everybody else gained very little? Right? You two have a reason to want to go kill giants because your characters hate giants. But now the reality of our game reflects the fiction of it because now you and Tim do want to go kill giants.
Yeah. Mechanically, I'm being rewarded.
Mechanically, you're being rewarded for your role playing. That's exactly right. And that's one of the reasons that people don't like first edition or basic, because one of the base assumptions was you want treasure, right? As a player, the Derek playing the game of Dungeons & Dragons, I want treasure. And so Gary Gygax said, hey, I'm going to give you experience for getting treasure because that's what you want. And your character is a greedy, adventuring mercenary, right? And not everybody aligned with that belief.
Yeah.
And so that fell into somewhat of disuse, but people kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater. Because the fact is, if you can figure out what it is that rewards your characters and what your players are interested in, but also what you as a GM want to reward, then you can set up your experience point system to reward that. The problem with, let's say, second edition and third edition D&D was that they got rid of XP for treasure. And instead, you got XP for fights. So what did every character become?
Fighter.
They became a murder hobo. Right? Yep. Because now the way I got better at the game is by killing things, right?
Yeah.
So instead, you can think about ways to reward your characters and players for the things that you want to reward. So for example, if you are building a dungeon and you want finding the dwarves' ancient treasure to be a big part of how you reward your players, then you might say, hey, guess what? I'm going to set aside several hundred experience points. Remember, you need 1,000 experience points to level in Pathfinder 2. And we have 10 rooms, right? So players probably aren't going to go to every single room. All right. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to put 1,500 XP into our dungeon.
Yeah. So that they can level up.
Right. But meaning, because if you put 1,000 experience points in and you divide it across the 10 rooms, you're basically saying, if you want to level up, you have to hit every single room.
Yeah, which is more of a railroad again.
It's more of a railroad again. So maybe you put 1,500 XP into this dungeon, but maybe you say, guess what? 750 of that XP is going to be for finding some of the key treasures of the dwarves. Okay. And maybe 350 XP is going to be for figuring out the lore of what happened to the dwarves. Right. And then maybe, 300 XP is going to be for, for fights, for kicking ass and taking names. And here, I'll just make it 350 then and make this. That's 700. That's it. And then 50 XP is going to be for finding this, for stopping the necromancer. Okay. That's like a bonus, right? On top of what you would get for fighting him. Right. You can do this. You can do this for your whole campaign. You can do this for a whole adventure, but you're letting, and here's the other thing. Don't make it transparent. Let the players know. Hey,
this is pretty cool. Cause I'm just looking at that. I go, okay, we want to fight and get treasure. Boom. I can level up. I don't want to fight. I want to get discovery, lore. Well, right. And the treasure.
That's right. Look at this. A party that went into this dungeon and only found the treasures and the secrets and the lore would level up. And they wouldn't have to fight anything. And so now when the party encounters a group of monsters and they use a diplomacy check or they use a spell that lets them like escape and run away, it's actually very valid because they're still going to get enough experience and treasure or experience through treasure and lore to be able to level up and continue to advance the game. If you tell players that you don't have to fight. You can do whatever you want. It's Dungeons and Dragons. And then they go, okay. And they have a session and they do a lot of talking and they do a lot of running away. And at the end of the session, you go, okay, everybody gets 25 experience points.
Yeah.
What you're actually telling them is what you did was not good.
Yeah.
What you did
was not what I wanted you to do.
Right. Or what the game wanted you to do, or what you want to do. Right.
Yeah.
You want to encourage behavior. If at the end of the session, the players were doing things that you think is in line with either their characters or your idea for the game, then they should be getting more XP, not less. Right. And
I like it. Love it.
And so, one of the things that we can, we'll probably talk about here in a future episode is how you can use these sort of concepts of this dungeon as a flowchart to sort of help guide your monster design, your encounter design, where you put things and all the rest. So
awesome. Now, do I have homework this time?
Do you have homework this time? Yes, you do.
Oh, okay. I better hold on.
We're going to get our first homework. So your homework is going to be, I want you to design for me we'll call it a 12 node dungeon, right? With 12 different boxes. But keeping in mind that currently our dungeon concept calls for sort of a dwarven stronghold.
Yep.
Where they were keeping and storing treasure that has an undead dwarf presence, possibly some goblins. You kept saying orcs, but this is level 1. Goblins are probably more appropriate.
I need your advice.
But we'll get into that next time when we talk about monster design. But some sort of evil humanoid presence, right? Goblins. And then also a necromancer who is trying to steal the evil power of this place for himself. And keep that in mind as you're building these areas. So not only build out the design, but sort of maybe make some notes about where you think certain of those factions might be located in the dungeon in a way that's going to be interesting from a gameplay, like a game board, like a board game experience, but also from a narrative sense, right? Like it makes sense that the necromancer wouldn't live here and, the goblins wouldn't live right next door, because obviously there would be some sort of fighting and one side would probably win, right?
Okay.
So that's your homework.
Also, if you guys are listening and you want this homework assignment too, you can do it as well.
Yeah, and I'll actually say this too.
Along.
Yeah, and I'll also say this because this is our first night school homework assignment. If you are a member of our Patreon and you are signed up, we'll have a channel for night school. Well, I think we already do have a channel for night school in our Patreon Discord. And if you sketch up your idea, go ahead and post it in the Discord in our night school channel, and I'll critique it. We'll take a look at it. Yeah. We'll beat it up. We'll talk about it. I'm sure the other members of our group will beat it up as well.
Derek will critique mine, then be like, you should have done what this guy did.
Yeah, I'll be like, Bob, just copy what what Anthony did. So yeah, if you're interested in that, take a look. We have a link below to our Discord to check that out. So, we're back. I'm sorry if this was a little rambling, but this is a real honest to God conversation, Bob and I on Zoom. So hopefully
that's what I actually appreciate, because I can sort of just let the conversation flow as I'm thinking about it and how it should unfold. It's like a one-on-one tutoring session. It's really what it is.
Exactly. And hopefully you all at home get to benefit from that as well. But if you are a member of our Patreon, maybe I can give you some direct feedback as well. So, Bob, any other thoughts here before we sign out?
No, I'm sort of already thinking about my homework assignment, so I'm kind of interested to see how this kind of comes out for the next one.
Okay, great. Well, thanks so much, everyone, for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Knights of Last Call.